Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Welcome to this bonus episode of the New Warehouse podcast on Parcel Diversification. Originally broadcast live on LinkedIn featuring Timur Ilagulashvili of Logistics Remix and John McClyment of Operational Innovations. We are diving into why and how you should diversify your parcel carriers. Stay tuned to find out this and some of their thoughts on how the market is evolving and how to prepare yourself to continue to evolve along with it.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
All right, we are live here today with this live version of the New Warehouse podcast. So thanks for those who are coming in here and tuning in. Today, we're going to be talking about parcel carrier diversification. We're going to do a little how and why to diversify and what that kind of means and a little bit about the parcel market overall as well. I'm going to be joined by some experts here on the topic. We got Timur of Logistics Remix. He's the president over there, and John McClyment, who's principal of Operational Innovations, both big LinkedIn guys as well, talking about these kind of things and overall operational improvements all together. So they're going to join me today for this conversation. So John and Timur, thank you so much for joining me today. John, why don't you kind of kick it off here, tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your background and what Operational Innovations is.
Yeah, for sure. So I am John, and I've been doing logistics for about 20 years now. I've spent most of my career in the big corporate B2B space, but I've always had a strong interest in e-commerce, direct to consumer, really like that customer experience that can come from operations and the value that you can add to your overall brand and that promise that you're making to your customers through how you execute. I have been doing now sort of direct and independent work with either service providers or brands for the last 8 months or so after sort of stepping away from corporate and leveraging, like you said, some of that LinkedIn presence and awareness that I've been able to build up over the years to connect with different people. I have two sort of main ways that I work with. I either work with retailers to kind of look at what they're doing and how they're doing it and how to do it in a more cost-effective or customer-focused way, customer-centric way. And I work with service providers to, really improve that operational execution and excellence, sort of do it in a way that's cost-effective and really generating the right quality of revenue, because it's easy to take on business at a loss or just doing it on heavy discounts. It's a lot harder to kind of find the right balance to where it actually works for everyone.
Interesting, and great stuff there, and definitely great stuff that you're posting all the time, as well as your newsletter, I will say. And Timur, how about you? Logistics Remix, tell us a little bit about you and your business there.
Kevin, thanks for having me on the show today. Really appreciate the invite and be part of this conversation. So Timur, I'm president of Logistics Remix, founded the company 3 years ago. We help retailers and 3PLs bring last mile delivery providers into their network to save on cost, improve their delivery performance, and really just ultimately drive mutual success. Prior to starting the company, I was VP of sales of Lone Star Overnight, a regional parcel carrier down in South Central US. And I've been in the logistics space somewhere, John, about 20 years. First half of my career was more on freight side with C.H. Robinson and Echo Global Logistics. And the second half more on e-commerce with companies like UShip and Shipping Easy. And I've really kind of tailored my focus around e-commerce shipping and helping both retailers and 3PLs, third-party fulfillment companies, find new providers, save money, and improve their delivery performance.
All right, great stuff. And we're definitely going to be talking about that today, how to go about that and improve performance on that delivery side, and also maybe save some money too, which I think is a great thing. People like to save money is what I hear out there. But why don't we start like super kind of high level here, because we talk about, freight carriers, all these different things. There's, different types of that. So I guess from both of your perspectives, how would you kind of define a parcel carrier, and what would be a parcel carrier in your eyes or your mind? I guess, John, if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for me, the easiest distinction is really just, a parcel carrier versus other types of either LTL or last mile type activity. B2B is just someone that's really dealing in unitary orders, that direct to consumer. So, it's going to be a lot smaller. It's a lot more stops, same kind of process, but really dealing in a different level of volume per transaction or something like that is probably the easiest way that I would think about it.
All right. And Timur, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, something I've been using for a long time, which is any parcel, a parcel carrier delivers parcel packages. So it's anything weighing under 150 pounds. And so that's kind of how I look at it. So once you get over 150, typically it's better to go freight, although people can argue, right? There's optimization. Maybe you could send multiple packages with a parcel carrier, but it's got to be someone that's delivering, boxes that a driver can pick up with their hands. Typically, they'll weigh less than 50 pounds. Sometimes go up to 150 pounds, and they'll be picked up at the fulfillment center, distribution center, and delivered to the final destination.
Definitely. And obviously, a huge part of the overall e-commerce process. I know you guys have done a lot with e-commerce around that. And, as we see e-commerce growth more and more, obviously there's more discussion around the parcel carriers and how they're getting involved, who's winning in a sense in the race, I guess you could say, and all those different things. So as we look at those parcel carriers, and there isn't necessarily maybe a one size fits all for everybody out there. There's obviously multiple options. So let's talk a little bit about kind of the diversification. So when we start to talk about diversifying those parcel carriers that we're utilizing, Timur, like what does that mean really to bring in diversification in that area of your shipping process?
Yeah, so I think let's make a distinction here. So there's a single source, and then there's a diversified strategy. So a single source strategy just kind of is using one carrier to deliver all packages, right? So every package is getting picked up by one of the nationals, for example, and they can deliver basically every order I have going out the door as a retailer or 3PL. But diversified strategy, I kind of think as long, if you have like the old school diversified strategy is two carriers, right? So if you have, a national carrier that handles your 1 pound and above, or as an example, we used to use this example, and then, maybe the post office delivers under a pound packages, and that already right there on its own becomes like a diversified strategy. Now that's like, the early stages of diversification, but, I think as long as you have at least two in the mix, and the second one is handling a significant amount of your volume, right? Not just 1%, but, in the tens of percent of your volume, I think you can call yourself having a diversified strategy.
Gotcha. And John, you want to add anything into that from your perspective?
No, like Timur's been obviously doing this very specific topic for a long time. That's pretty good. I mean, I think, the only thing I share is that, it's a concept of risk mitigation, right? Like, you're trying to understand how you're going to execute your business and how, like Timur said, you're going to strategically do it and for what reasons. But yeah, it's basically just not putting all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point there too, because we talked kind of in the beginning there, we mentioned about, creating better efficiencies and maybe some cost savings there. But I think that's a good point, John. I mean, it is about to, creating some contingency or risk management as well. So I guess, John, why don't you kind of keep going on that point a little bit and kind of talk a little bit about why you would want to diversify from a parcel standpoint.
I mean, there can be a lot of reasons that customers, or a retailer, for example, would want to diversify. I think, one of the big ones is obviously cost. I think people are trying to look to find different ways to squeeze every little bit out of there. There's definitely risk in terms of service and performance. I mean, I think, the UPS kind of, potential strike or the concerns with what was going on while they were doing their negotiation last year is a good example of like, well, if you were all UPS, what happens? Because, it's once everyone starts scrambling at the last minute, the available capacity from other carriers can get eaten up really quickly, or now you're sort of like negotiating under duress. So you don't really want to do that at the last minute, but you could also want to diversify to be able to offer different types of customers, different types of delivery experiences, or you may have certain products that have special requirements or something like that that may not fit a more generic mold, right? Because you got to remember that when you're using some of the big nationals, like Timur has mentioned, that's a system. Like there's a process. It's like there's things you can do and things that maybe you can't really do. So there can be different ways and reasons that you may want to diversify that mix and how you get your product to consumers.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of different reasons within there, and I think it's an interesting case, and it certainly adds some complexity to the operation as well. But I think there's can be potentially a lot of benefits in there, as you mentioned, depending upon type of product or creating some type of risk mitigation. Like you mentioned, the strike last year. I mean, that was a huge deal. A lot of people were I won't say necessarily panicking, but certainly thinking about what should they do in case something like that happens, if they're in that single source type of thing, as Timur mentioned in there. But Timur, what about from your perspective? Why? And you're helping people, I mean, diversify all the time, right? So, I mean, why would you say would be the reason to go about doing that?
Well, I love John's analogy of don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
And risk mitigation is such a big one. We saw that with the looming UPS Teamster strike. We saw it, of course, during the pandemic. I mean, I heard some crazy stories. I'm sure our audience is, probably heard something similar where, retailers weren't getting their packages picked up, right? Or maybe 50% of their packages were getting picked up. It just wasn't enough capacity during the start of the pandemic to get everything out the door. And so I think this is a major one. It may not be the most important reason today. I think, capacity is plenty. We can touch base on that later, but definitely capacity is such a big one for risk mitigation. The other two I'd call out are, one, cost. Of course, it's all about, the dollar, how much you're spending and what you're paying. And are you spending more? Are you spending less? Are your costs increasing in line with your sales? Are you taking advantage of the current market? So cost is really important. And with a diversified strategy, you have more opportunity to find providers that can yield some savings for you. And the third one, I would call out just capabilities. And I think John mentioned to you may want a certain carrier for a certain task. Well, so if you're delivering, let's say, some kind of specialized healthcare equipment, or you're delivering something that might, like a perishable that might melt within 48 hours, you definitely want to ensure that product gets to the right person at the right time. And you can't take a chance of a late delivery. So what are the capabilities, right? Not every carrier is equal. Of course, we'd like to think of parcel shipping as a commodity, but at the end of the day, it's not. They're all going to have different transit times. They're all going to have different performance metrics that they're trying to hit. They're all going to have different network setups and different technology. And so, it's what's important is everyone's going to have a different goal in mind with each order and their business operation, and the capabilities of the carriers that you select is going to have to match those goals.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a very interesting point there about the capabilities of the carriers matching what you're trying to do. And I think, both of you guys work with 3PLs a lot too. And obviously the 3PL is trying to, get the best shipping cost, as you mentioned there, Timur. I mean, the dollar certainly rules, or, cash rules everything around me, I guess we could say here, a little Wu-Tang quote. But yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting too, like to be able to find that right fit for a product. So I'm curious in both your experience, and either one of you can chime in here on this if you have seen this. I mean, do you see where 3PLs are diversifying because they have a new client or a potential client that has maybe a different type of product or needs some type of special attention from a carrier perspective, so they've started to diversify more to accommodate that client?
Yeah, one thing I see, right, as 3PLs, third-party fulfillment companies, as they grow and their volume and their customers grow and their volume grows, right? So they have more volume to play around with and to come up with more interesting carrier diversification strategies, right? Because when you're small, you may just start with 2 or 3 carriers, and then as you get bigger and bigger and you've got enough volume to carve out, for example, if you're in Texas like myself, right, and you're shipping a lot just within the state of Texas, you may have enough volume as your business grows to carve out and allocate to a regional carrier that's going to be a lot more cost competitive, can provide the service at the same or better speed, and save yourself and your customers some money. So that's just one example that I see is as businesses grow, their strategy, their goals change, and with more volume, they can be a lot more creative.
Interesting. So I guess on that note there too, I mean, you mentioned like as you get more volume, like then, you can get more creative with it. I mean, at what point would you say, for any shipper, I guess, at what point, does it make sense to start to diversify?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And it's going to be a little different with everyone. It really just depends. But I'd say it's got to be, and I'd be curious to hear what John's thoughts on this. I'd say it's got to be at least worth it for you to break off a sort, right? So have a different carrier coming in to pick up, a separate amount of packages. It's got to make sense for your team to run an efficient operation. As you had a carrier, right? It may make you more inefficient. So how do you stay efficient? And typically, it's got to make sense from a volume standpoint to be enough for that carrier to provide you with a good rate card, right? Because if you're going to go to a carrier and say, "Hey, I've got 5 parcels a day. Can you beat the national carrier rate I've got?" You're probably not going to get there. So you got to be in the hundreds, right? I think at least to start off. Again, every carrier may have their cutoff on when they can get really competitive. But I'd say, hundreds plus is when it starts getting really interesting.
Interesting. So, John, what are your thoughts there? And I'm curious, John, like as you kind of give your thoughts there too, like from an operational perspective, like Timur mentioned in there, like does it make sense to do another sort, or from a labor perspective? I mean, I'm curious your thoughts on kind of both sides of it. From when do you think it's a good time to diversify, but also like from the operations perspective, like what goes into that?
Yeah, no. So I probably have a slightly different take. I mean, volume of course is one potential driver, right, which is going to usually be around cost, right? Because I'm going to have a certain amount of volume, and like Timur mentioned, you have to have some kind of threshold to be able to parcel it off and like sort of parse it out, because you don't want to lose any kind of volume rebates that you're currently getting, right? And then you want to be able to take advantage of someone else that usually would either be cheaper, or again, it's pure just risk mitigation. But I would say that the clearest reason to potentially diversify, or when you want to start to diversify, is when you want to address a pain point, like something isn't working, something isn't going as well as you want it to. And that can be cost, obviously, right? That hurts. But I mean, very often too, it's like, hey, I don't like the service I'm getting here. We're having too many failures this way. Like, we're getting damaged product. We're getting, customers complaining. So there could be a lot of reasons that, you're going to look to diversify. And that's usually where, I would start to ask customers like, well, like, what sucks right now, and like, what are you unhappy with, and what's not working, right? So I think that those are really interesting areas, because to your point, right, when you start to diversify and you start to bring in more carriers, like there's potentially more management, right? If you're a retailer yourself, like, how many relationships do you really want to manage for a similar type of activity, right? There is honestly a point of diminishing returns, and I think that, anytime someone's talking about diversification, you have to be open and honest about that, because having 100 carriers is not most certainly, going to be easier to manage than having 3, as an example. You know what I mean? And you may not get a lot of benefits out of having those 100 carriers anyway. And really just understanding what's going to make the most sense for your business and for your customers. And I think that has to be really tightly held when you're doing your diversification strategy, because you can't forget that no matter who is delivering for you, they're essentially representing your brand. They're that physical manifestation of that, buy button and that product showing up at the door. And that's one thing that I, very actively defend when I'm working with anyone is like, what's that experience? Because that person or that experience is the face of your brand for that customer. It's the actual manifestation of that sort of transaction into a physical good. So you do have to be very mindful about that, in my opinion, when you're thinking about diversification, how you diversify, and the reasons why you want to do it.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think those are good points. And certainly, like, when you feel those pain points, as you mentioned, I mean, sure, that's definitely like a great signal too. But I think you have a good point in there, both of you, about, the operational impact too, right? It's not as easy. It's not like you add another carrier and it's just like, oh, well, there's just another carrier that shows up, right, to pick up some packages. Like, you have to separate those packages out. There's more, labor involved with that, potentially, maybe more on the back end side too, that has to be put together to be able to enable that to happen. So I think there's a lot of different factors there to see when is the right time to do that, and what's like the telling factor to do that, which is interesting. So now if we look at diversification, and we've kind of talked about maybe why you would diversify, and what would be a good time to do that, but let's talk a little bit about how do you go about diversifying? Like, what's the right way to do that? So, Timur, you want to start there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm thinking of taking a different approach with it, though. It's like, what are some limitations that we have? Because there's, I've been in conversations where it's a business that's shipping to commercial addresses mostly, and they're not sure where to go from here, right? I think the adoption of carrier diversification in a big way has happened on the residential delivery side, but if you're a B2B business, it hasn't really happened in a big way, and there's several reasons for that. So it's like, what are the blockers and what are the limitations? And I think there's people that are, very interested. There's companies very interested in this whole carrier diversification, because they see what it's done in e-commerce, they see what it's done with the B2C shippers, and they see the benefits, and their leadership is asking them to go look into it, but they're stuck. And so a couple of reasons I want to bring up here, because I think, I think we are going to see some more unlock with B2B and with other shippers. But one is, not having even the right technology, right? To ship with multiple carriers, let's call it, 3 to 5 or 7, or however many are the right for your strategy in across the US. Well, you've got to have a system that's going to be able to generate a label for each one. You've got to have a system that's going to be able to route to each one. You've got to have a system that's going to be able to rate shop, choose the right level of service, track the packages. That, those systems exist. There's a bunch of, really good providers out there. There's multi-carrier shipping software. It's on-prem, there's in cloud. But, there are still businesses out there that I talk to that are not using anything that's going to make it easy for them to bring on carriers, right? So that's a major blocker. A second reason I'll bring up as a limitation to carrier diversification is the shipper's location, right? So if your warehouse is in, I don't know, let's call them in, I don't know, let's throw out like South Dakota, right? Or somewhere that's remote,
Sure.
right? Not in a major metro. You're not near a major airport. Like, how do you get your packages to the carriers that you want to diversify with? So that is a major limitation. Luckily, there's new providers out there that help achieve that. They help you run the middle mile, get your packages into the right hands, and do the sorting for you. And that's all newer in the market, I'd say, in the last 5 years. But that is a major limitation. So curious. What John has to say about
Yeah, that's funny because I was not going to talk about B2B. My B2B life was was a huge part of obviously the first half of my career. And actually, funny enough, I'll tell you straight up, because from a market perspective, I was a shipper and I had my phone ringing just nonstop about carriers trying to get, lanes and activity from me and whatever. The biggest barrier, in my opinion, when it comes to B2B versus B2C, B2C, there's like, at least in Canada and the US right now, but pretty much every country has got their own variant.
Mhm.
It's a standard process if you think about it, whether it's like UPS or Amazon or like Bob's Delivery or whoever. Like if you're doing parcel B2C, you're dropping it at my door, you're running away as fast as you can, and that's the end of it. B2B, and I'm not saying that that's what you should be doing. I'm just saying that that's what's happening for a lot of people out there, and why I advocate why there's a lot of opportunity to do things differently. But from a B2B perspective, and what I think holds diversification back more than anything else, is that it's usually much more process oriented, right? Like you have to do things in a certain way, whether it's your facility, whether it's a recipient's facility, right? Your customer in that B2B case, who they're getting it, like you want things done a certain way. Like when I was shipping B2B, like I had to deal with like the Walmarts and the Costcos and all of these big guys. Like I can tell you 100%, I had zero interest in having problems because that person didn't know how to interact with my product for Costco and the expectations, or with Walmart or with whoever. So I think that the biggest barrier there is, how do you actually, if you want to be able to diversify, and if you are a carrier that's looking to jump in with multiple people, and I see some people in the audience, and I'm not going to call anyone out just because of the fact that I'm not here to make endorsements today, but having that real specialization and really understanding like why you're good at something or how you can add value, whether that's like, CPG food, whether that's, specific type of automotive, or whether it's whatever. Because in the same way that people benefit in B2C parcel of essentially having a standard SOP, that's very often what ends up happening in the B2B world, is that how can you show that customer, and how can you show that you can handle that product, you're not going to cause them issues, that that relationship for them is important, and how that's delivered is really important. So I think that that's a big thing. On the flip side, just talking about diversification with parcel carriers and how do you do it? I think that there's really two ways. Like there's the and I'm going to be a little bit crass, and I'm not trying to be rude with anyone, but there's kind of like the intentional way, where whether you're a retailer or you're a 3PL, you're making very strategic partnerships for the right reasons. And then what I very often call like the lazy way, which is just basically like, hey, we've signed up for X platform. As long as everyone's coming through X platform, it's fair game. And it becomes just like a rate shopping exercise, or like, lowest bidder type exercise. And I mean, you're going to obviously get a lot of diversification that way, because you never know who your parcels are going to. But I'm much more of an advocate, if you're really talking about your business value and your customer experience, of going down the path of intention.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's a really kind of interesting insights there on how to kind of go about it, but also looking at it from the perspective of, like you guys both talked about, what are some barriers there, and what are things that, you need to think about to address, like not only from a back end system perspective, but also from like that process perspective, like you mentioned too, John, like, there's again, to follow the SOP proper way, to be able to make sure that you're getting that experience to your customer. Like if it's a Costco, like you mentioned there, that they're going to get everything the way that they're supposed to, and that you would deliver it in your same way, right, as your business. So, I mean, I think it's very interesting the different ways to go about that. You guys mentioned kind of a couple numbers here and there around carriers and things like that. I think Timur, you mentioned maybe you have 3 to 7 carriers. John, you mentioned maybe you have all the way up to 100 carriers when you're talking.
Oh, never have 100.
Yeah, never have 100. So my question there is like, where would you say, like, if you're going to go diversify, like Timur said in the beginning, if you have 2 carriers are using kind of steadily, then you can consider yourself diversified. But, I mean, where would you put the limit at? Like, where would you say, like, okay, like you're trying to do too much, right? You're putting too many carriers in place. You're trying to utilize too many carriers, and you're just getting to a point where maybe you have like those diminishing returns, like you mentioned earlier, John. So, where would you guys say like is maybe a sweet spot to be in, or you're getting to a place where like you're just trying to do too much?
Yeah, no, I think, John, I hope you were joking with the 100.
100%. If someone's got 100,
yeah.
please, like, get anybody to help you, because that's too much.
So, yeah, call one of us. Yeah, I mean, look, I talked to shippers that are using 20 plus, so that's not
Wow.
that happens, and that's just like in the U.S. So it happens, and but it's not overnight, right? It's a continuous process, right? So you may diversify from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. And as the volume grows, as you meet new providers in certain regions where you have volume and you want to try out providers, like, I mean, shippers, retailers, 3PLs, they shouldn't consider this a one time and done kind of project. This is a continuous, ongoing initiative, right? So don't end at the number where you are now. It's going to be different in every market, right? So for some reason you're seasonal, or your business is cyclical. Today we're not seeing volumes grow that much with the nationals. In fact, they're coming down year over year. And if you're a retailer with volume staying flat or coming down, you may not want to be continuing to grow because you're spreading that volume too thin. Your team may be shrinking. You might be spreading resources too thin. So there's no right answer. I think it's just continuous measurement and improvement. But if you're a pretty large retailer, I'd say 20 is probably on the high end, and probably close to 10 is where you want to be. And if you're small, it really just depends on where you are, how much volume you have, what your goals are. John, thoughts?
Yeah, I hate it because it's like, this is like one of those topics where it depends very much, is usually probably the best answer. But look, my rule of thumb, super simple. Don't ever get yourself in a position where your volume essentially makes it so that you don't matter to that carrier. You know what I mean? Like, if you've diversified to the point where you're like,
I agree,
in their bottom X% of their client base, it's like, how much are you going to really expect from service, attention, when you have failures, when you want to change part of your process, when you want to implement something new? It sounds harsh, and it's probably not what people will admit to you in a sales meeting, but it's like, you're not going to matter enough. You know what I mean? So you kind of want to make sure that you matter and are significant in some way. And if you start to dilute that, then you've probably gone too far. And that would be a general rule of thumb, irrespective of the size of your business. So that's the starting point for sure. And then, obviously you're going to get sort of differentiation, and you're going to get different reasons to do it. You might see one retailer, for example, that has a similar volume to someone else, like to one of their competitors even, and they're a little bit more diversified. And it's like, well, you guys have the same volume. Like, aren't you going to be better off? But depending on, regionalization, depending on their market penetration, depending on like what they're trying to do, it might make more sense, for the way that they operate, or for the way that their product kind of falls into the market, to be more diversified, even with the same volume overall. Like, if you were just thinking about, transactions per year, or, packages per year, or something like that. So, there is obviously room for that personalization, but, for anyone, never make yourself unimportant.
Yeah, I think
that's a good point.
Really good point. Yeah.
John, I was going to jump in here, Kevin,
Sure.
real quick. I actually think, just had this thought that, it also depends on the location, number of locations you're shipping from, right? So if you're only shipping from one location, the number of carriers is going to be very limited. right? If you're shipping out of New Jersey, you're not going to want to use, multiple regional carriers to deliver in New York and New Jersey, right? Doesn't make sense. You're not going to have the volume. But if you're shipping from New Jersey and California and Chicago and Dallas and Miami, multiple locations, the more locations you have, the more opportunity you have to leverage multiple relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point there too, because I've experienced that before, where I used to work for a smaller mid-sized business, and we did a decent amount of UPS volume, and that was like our primary parcel carrier. But then you get around peak season and all those things, and every day we had a drop trailer there, and we were pretty much filling that every single day. But then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're not dropping a trailer off at the night, and we can't get one until later in the day. Like, you start to feel like that deprioritization a little bit, and I think that's a really important thing. Yeah,
and it totally happens. I mean, no one will tell you that it happens, but I mean, when the crunch really comes, and you've got everyone kind of screaming, and you've got X amount of resources left, and that's limited, everyone, I don't care who it is, everyone starts allocating to the customers they have to take care of the most, or that have the biggest impact for their business. And that's why, I'm always like, look, sometimes you're much better off being a big fish in a small pond and being that important to someone versus, just aligning with the big logo because that's safe.
Yeah.
Right. Because if for them, it's safe for you up until all of a sudden there's a crunch, especially, your business is obviously highly seasonal, like in the traditional sense, with the holidays, or you have your own seasonality or cyclic nature to your business, because how much attention are you going to get, and how much service or care? And these are areas where, when I'm saying about being intentional about picking the right partners and the people that can really work with you in the right way, because they really either know that market, or they have a lot of capacity or capability or connection or whatever in that particular market, can be a real benefit. And probably the biggest thing that you see all over LinkedIn all of the time these days, from especially the service provider side, is relationships. And that's really why, right? You're cultivating these relationships as well with your volume, and that's what it is, right? You're trying to find partnerships. Sometimes you're just looking for transactions, right? And you don't care, and it's just about getting stuff done. But more and more, you do want to find those relationships that when things are hard, that's when it's going to matter. Because when it's easy, nobody cares. It's always when things get hard that things matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, just for relationships and in general, and partnerships throughout, business in that sense. So I'm curious, Timur, you mentioned in there a little bit ago about, that you're seeing the nationals, kind of year over year, the volume is getting a little lower, is getting a little more spread out. So, there's a lot of kind of regional carriers that are coming into play. And, we've seen, I think, this year recently, just in the last month or two, some investment in some of these players as well. So I'm curious your thoughts on these regional carriers, and how are they playing a part against some of the nationals, the big ones we all know, and how are they kind of maybe helping some of these companies figure out different ways to diversify?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in that part of the market that we're what I call the shippers market, right? I think we haven't seen in a while, especially during the pandemic when volumes went up, and you had Carol Tomei, the CEO of UPS, saying there's 5 million more packages per day than we can deliver. We're on the flip side of that, right? We have a lot of excess capacity. Actually, on the last earnings call with UPS, Carol Tomei mentioned that there was about 6 million parcels per day in access capacity, right? So we haven't filled up all that capacity just yet, and that's why you're seeing, the national carriers and everyone really kind of competing more and fighting more for volume. Relationships aside, it's gotten a lot more competitive, especially going into this year. And with regional carriers, one of the things that you're able to do when you put multiple carriers metrics on, let's say, one chart, you're able to see kind of, what's their cost? How much are they costing me for every delivery? How are they compared to other carriers, let's say regional versus national, or regional versus regional, et cetera. And you're able to benchmark against each other. You're able to do that on performance basics. So are they delivering on time? How fast are they delivering? And you're able to really create a good story as a retailer or 3PL on what's happening with your carrier network. So, not having regionals, if you're only single source or you're only using nationals today, the only metrics you have are from the carriers that you're using. And so you don't have too much of a benchmark. You don't have too much of an alternative to look to when you're creating your strategy. So I think metrics come into play and are very important. And having multiple carriers, having especially regionals in the mix, allow you to really get a good picture for what's possible.
Interesting. And John, what do you think about some of the regional players out there?
Yeah, I think that the regional carriers are a gateway. You know what I mean? I think that you're seeing so much of a shift in the global economy in terms of where people are looking for things, right? And that's a huge change in the market, right? And obviously there's the Asian volume. I mean, like the Sheins and the Temus and Alibaba, all of that stuff. And that obviously plays a big factor, but it's everywhere. Like I bought something from New Zealand and it showed up within 4 days. Like that's insane.
Nice.
Right? But at the same time too, those brands that are now not just Canadian, they're not American, they're not just Mexican, they're all over the world, and that people have access to basically product from everywhere these days really is important when you're understanding how that landscape is going to shift, because a lot of the time those people will maybe not be big enough for their US domestic volume or the Canadian domestic volume or whatever it could be, right? So they're going to have to rely on people, for example, that are going to appreciate their business, that are still going to get it done, that are still going to be competitive and want it, because the regionals, I think, honestly, probably are doing a better job about being hungry and providing opportunity for a lot of different brands, whereas UPS and FedEx, they live very heavily on their legacy and their logo, but not everybody is maybe able to sort of work with them in a way that they feel that they either matter enough or they get the right kind of pricing or they're able to actually use them to penetrate the market. So, the regionals are growing, and, Timur mentioned it at the start, heavily driven by technology, right? In the past, the regionals were, or the nationals were there because they had so much money and they had so much access. And look, they have amazing infrastructures, and right now that's still let's call it like the bigger part of what I would say is their moat, is their infrastructure. But the technology and all of the systems and all of the ability to transact, orders in whatever degree and push these right through to end of the line consumers with tracking and stuff like that used to be really a huge reason for them, and that's dropped off. Like everybody has that stuff now, so you're getting a lot more innovation and you're getting people doing really great things, in terms of what they're offering in the space. So I think the regionals are a great vehicle for innovation. They're a great vehicle for access, especially, and I really think that that's an area of massive benefit for them versus the nationals.
I just sorry, Kevin. I just thought of something.
Sure.
Here. I'm kind of starting to see, and I've had this kind of in my mind for a while, but starting to see the role of the regionals kind of morph. And one of the things that, I mean, if you look at, and many of the regionals have been around for 30, 50 years, right? I mean, they're not new companies. Of course, there are some new ones, like you mentioned, the ones that are raising venture capital, private equity, more recent rounds. But there's a lot that were, mainly delivering, mostly B2B, even before e-commerce, right? They were delivering before e-commerce, and they were used by local shippers. So if you're delivering, let's say, a lane from Dallas to Houston, let's say it was a payroll check back in the day, now you're delivering a parcel package for an e-commerce store. But where I'm seeing kind of the regional's role change is not just being kind of like a mini national in just their region where they do the pickup, they sort it, they get it to the last mile station, make that delivery, but they're also being used as injection hubs. And so whether it's coming, freight coming from, cross-border from China, other countries coming into the US, or it could be just a parcel, an order from the fulfillment center shipping from LA going into New York. We're starting to see regionals make the deliveries, but they're not necessarily doing the pickup, right? So there's other players that are coming into the market that are helping arrange the move of that parcel from the distribution center, from the fulfillment center, all the way into that regional carrier's hub, and for that regional carrier to make that last mile delivery. And I'm starting to see a lot more, growth coming from that side of the business, where there's volume that's being injected into the regionals, and the regionals are now able to deliver more volume, right? Because it's coming from outside of their coverage area.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting things happening there, and some different approaches to, like, as you're just talking about, Timor, like how they're able to access like more volume to deliver within their region. And I think that goes to like a lot of different partnerships and interesting ways that they're playing with tech and being able to be a little more innovative with it. So I want to take a pause here. If anybody is in the audience listening and they have a question, or they want to add any thoughts of their own or experiences, feel free to raise your hand and we can bring you up here to speak as well. But John and Timor, I mean, on the topic of like the regional carriers, I mean, are there any like regional carriers that kind of jump out to you that you think are doing something really interesting that you'd be willing to share and talk about a little bit?
Personally, for me, I'm probably not going to name names, because, like I said, I'm pretty careful about either making recommendations or anything like that, or because I think a lot of people are doing really great things. I think that's probably, for me, that something that I would share. I think what I would probably put out there for more people is get more awareness, like actually understand the regionals or the different types of carriers that are within your geography, your sales base, your target markets, whatever, and talk to them and see what they're offering and seeing what they're doing differently, because a lot of them are doing some really interesting and great things, and look, having conversations and challenging your status quo is never a bad thing.
All right, I appreciate that. And Timor, is there anybody you want to maybe shout out, or are you going to take the same position?
Same as John. I mean, it's
Okay.
you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And I don't want the multiple phone calls after that, after shouting out any names. Why did you shout out ours? I think I agree. I think a lot of people, a lot of carriers are doing a good job. They're advancing, they're innovating. We're seeing them raise money. They're seeing them grow. So it's good to see overall. But I see we brought up Bill from the audience to talk. So hey, Bill.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Fantastic, guys. Hey, great information, and thank you guys for putting this on. So we're hearing rumblings at Vetchco, being connected with so many of the regionals, of consolidation, among the regional providers. Are you guys seeing or hearing any of that too?
Yeah, I'll share some thoughts. So consolidation, yeah, it's gonna have to happen. I think, well, you have a lot of great regionals, and you have a lot of interesting activity that's happened. Honestly, you've had a lot of bad decisions that have happened too, right? You may have noticed, or anyone that sees what I'm writing, that I've either made comments or in my own post talking a lot about challenges people have had, or what I assume are challenges that they've had when it comes to economies of scale thinking, and thinking that, like, I can take on anything, and the more I take on, like, I'm always going to be good. And unfortunately, that's driven some contracts and some agreements for some really low rates, and particularly people that are heavily invested in some of the Asian volume that's come in, they've done it at some really, really low rates, like honestly rates that will bankrupt your business. So I do think that you are going to see more consolidation, because there's a lot of volume out there and there's a lot of activity, but you still have to have the right type of volume and mix, and you have to have the right type of revenue quality to really be able to survive, because logistics, last mile, at some point it's just a fixed cost business, right? And it's going to have this minimum cost that almost everybody is going to have something similar, like that. Obviously certain drivers like UPS are higher than others, but I mean, it is a fixed cost business, and most people are struggling, I think, with the balance right now. So you will see some consolidation for sure, that especially from people that maybe got a lot of funding, or from people that have experienced some dramatic customer shifts where they had some big accounts and some legacy accounts that maybe have decided to diversify a little bit differently, or potentially move their business completely on. Because when you've built on just one customer, or you've built on them paying a certain rate, and then they're not anymore, it's definitely causing profitability challenges.
What do you think, Timur?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I've been hearing this for the last several years, but I'm just not seeing it, right? I don't think we're seeing consolidation in a big way. I mean, you're seeing some carriers increase, go into new markets, but they're not doing it through acquisition, right? And there's been very, very few acquisitions in the space, other than the big one that we know between OnTrack and Lasership coming together. So I'm not seeing it. If anything, I would say capacity will, unless volume increases or something gives, a capacity is probably going to come out of the market, and that could just be like across every single carrier. But we'll see how this plays out. But I'm not seeing a situation where we start getting into like the nationals buying regional carriers. I just don't see it.
Yeah, that I should clarify. I'm saying consolidation in terms of like volume and where it's going to go, and volume having to go to fewer places. I would agree, though. I don't think a lot of people are feeling they need to run around and make acquisitions, because I look, if I'm being brutally honest, and I was running my own logistics right now, and we were doing a little bit better than other people, like sort of as a last mile business, I just wait for people to die, because that's some unfortunately will with their decisions. So I don't think you're going to see, I agree with Timur, you're not going to see acquisitions, but I do believe you're going to see more volume consolidation just naturally, as some people are going to be able to stay healthier than others.
Interesting. So thanks for chiming in there, Bill, and thanks for tuning in here as well. So check out Bill if you guys are listening. Check out his profile. You can connect with him right there. And John and Timur, so I guess like on that same kind of idea and same thought here, I mean, as we kind of get close to wrapping this thing up, I mean, what do you think shippers should be, especially mindful right now and kind of heading into the near future around the parcel carrier market and parcel carrier industry, I guess, in general? What would you guys say you should be on the lookout for there?
Yeah, listen, I think, if you don't have a diversified carrier strategy right now, is probably a good time to look into it, right? I mean, we're in a shipper's market, volumes flat to down, as we're seeing with the nationals. Everyone's hungry for business services. We're seeing great services across the board for the most part, from at least my perspective. So I would say, right now is a good time as any, compared to where we were in 2020 or 21, where you just, couldn't get the capacity to lock it in. Right now, the capacity is plenty, but at the same time, don't just jump into it, right? Take your time, have a strategy in mind, have a goal in mind. And I think John mentioned it earlier, go out, build those partnerships, build the relationships. There's conferences coming up here where the regional carriers and most carriers are going to attend, and those are good places to go start building those relationships, meeting new people.
All right, great.
Yeah,
John.
and I think, look, UPS and FedEx especially, you're seeing that they're becoming more bold and pretty confident when it comes to rate increases, and the way that they're looking at their revenue as it's coming in. The most recent batch of sort of like delivery area surcharges is interesting, right? Going into now much more dense markets, and showing that we have problems in these ones too. So at minimum, I think everybody should be looking for options, right? If you're with one of these nationals pretty much 100% of your business and whatever, like, hey, you're not going to hurt yourself by starting to have more conversations and getting more exposed to the market. But the post that I made for today's show this morning, and the message behind it is really about, and Rick Watson had actually, oddly enough, made an interesting post this morning that I commented on, that is really a parallel, is like, take every advantage you can. Like, really analyze your business and understand like what is going to contribute more to your bottom line or to your customers, and do it, right? Like, if you're still going to use your nationals for a lot of your business, that's fine. But there's probably some areas where you could get different ways to connect with your customers, get some better pricing, get some different service options, for example, in the markets that matter most, or maybe look at the markets where, you have the best market penetration and the best density and stuff like that, and see what happens if maybe you explore different alternatives, because, everything is so competitive these days, and there's so much product just all over the place, and everyone is being pounded to buy something from someone from somewhere else. So just have those conversations, do the exploration, and see what gains you can stack for yourself, because the more that you can, the better off you're going to be.
All right. Very good insights from both of you, and definitely appreciate you giving us that perspective from both sides here, and kind of diving into the overall diversification of everything. It's been a very insightful conversation with you both, and really appreciate the value that you've given here today to our audience, and to me as well. I was learning a lot along with the audience today. So really appreciate everybody tuning in and listening as well. To more, if people want to get in touch with you and talk about maybe diversifying their carriers, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn or click and connect with me right now. I post daily, like John, on about this very topic. And if you want to check out my website, logisticsremix.com. And look forward to connecting with as many people as want to talk.
All right, great. And John, how about you? What's the best way?
Yeah, I'm the same. It would be, LinkedIn, John at operationalinnovations.ca. So the website is operationalinnovations.ca. I am Canadian, so please don't hold that against me. LinkedIn, the DMs are always open. So you don't have to worry about us being connected or not. Free messages all the time. And just always happy to have conversations and connect and, talk shop.
All right, great. And definitely I would highly recommend, if you guys are not connected with both of these guys, make sure you do. They are delivering tons of value all the time for free on LinkedIn. So definitely give them a follow, connect with them, and reach out. They're always willing to help. So thank you to everybody for listening in. And if you want to find out more about the New Warehouse podcast, just head to thenewwarehouse.com. So Timur and John, thank you so much for the conversation today and the valuable insights. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.